name is Alyssa Mahadeo, journalist and community reporter, and I dedicate my time to searching for the stories that matter the most. Positive, uplifting, and inspiring stories that spotlight the challenges and obstacles we conquer to become the people who we are today. I don't know about you, but I'm tired of all the fairy tale lifestyles that people seem to be living on social media. Girl, you did not wake up like that. I'm interested in the genuine connections, the honest opinions, and the real uncut version of your true self. This show is about keeping it 100% real, deconstructing who we are and what we're all about. Join me as we sit down with individuals to discuss the personal struggles, the many challenges, and the moments that define us on this journey of self-discovery. Let's be real, life isn't fair and people make mistakes, but every opportunity is a learning experience. Let's discover the truth together right here on Real Talk. Good afternoon and welcome to another edition of Real Talk. I'm your host, Alyssa Mahadeo. Every Friday from 1 to 2 p.m. I am here. I hope everyone had a great long weekend last weekend. I know I thoroughly enjoyed it. I feel like we don't get enough long weekends like that. So it was a much well-deserved break. So today on the show, actually before we start the show, I wanted to mention that I am actually running a giveaway contest today on the network channel. I'm giving away 2 tickets to a play that is actually happening next week. Opening night is April 10th, and it's Take the Milkna. So if you guys want to know a little bit more about that, because I don't want to get into too many details, go on our TCN network page and tell me how much milk the actor in the video is drinking in that video. So, and I'll announce the winners on my page at the end of the day. All right, so today on the show, I have a special guest. I have an author today with me. I love having authors on the show, as you guys know, because I myself am a writer. And today I have Priya Ramsingh. Priya is actually, she just told me she's Trinidadian descent as well, so we have that in common. She's also the author of the book called Brown Girl in the Room, so I can definitely relate to being the brown girl in the room. Priya, thank you so much for coming on the show today. I want to start with a little bit about you, your background. Tell me a little bit about who you are, when you came here, and what kinds of things inspired you.
Okay, thank you, Alyssa. It's really great to be here today. I am, as you said before, I was born in Trinidad, and I came here. My family came here when I was 5, and that's in the 70s. So that's going to give you an idea of how old I am. But we came here and we moved to Parkdale for about a year. A lot of newcomers come in, move to Parkdale, and then we actually moved to the suburb of Rexdale. My family lived in Rexdale for, 17, 18 years. We lived in Rexdale. And Rexdale today is multicultural, and back then it was also a place where a lot of newcomers came to live. And so I grew up in a multicultural community, and a lot of my friends were the friends who I still keep in touch with today from places all over the world. So that's a little bit about me. And I grew up in Rexdale, and then I lived in a society where everybody was the same. There was no word diversity. We were all just multicultural, and we all lived as a community. And then when I left the community, then I started to see what the real world was like outside.
When did you leave Rexdale, the Rexdale community?
I left when I went to university in Ottawa.
Okay.
And so that's a big difference.
That's a huge difference.
Yeah.
What was that like for you?
It was different. A lot of people at the university didn't, they were from towns in Northern Ontario, and they had never seen someone like myself before. The idea that I was brown, first of all, which was, brown people back then were still kind of new. It was like kind of a new thing. And
it's like, am I white? Am I black? I don't know what's going on.
That's exactly it. Like the people used to actually ask me that.
Yeah.
Are you white, or are you black, or are you in the middle?
Or just assume that you're one of them.
Mulatto. I used to get, are you mulatto? And I didn't understand what that was, because we didn't use that word when I was growing
We've gotten like Hispanic a lot of the times. People get like Hispanic. Are you from Spain? Like, are you Spanish? Are you Mexican? Things like that. Like those are things that, and even like now that I've gotten. But continue.
Yeah. So when I went to Ottawa, like I used to get those questions, and I guess even growing up in Rexdale, I always had the question that, how can you be brown and you're not from India, but you're from the Caribbean? So that was a whole new dynamic of people, because there weren't a lot of West Indians back then, and if there was like 1 or 2. So growing up, and then when I went to university, I was always trying to carve out that sense of identity that I was a brown girl from the Caribbean, which is a very distinctive culture. And so, that's been a whole part of my growing up. And a lot of that is reflected in the book, actually, the character. She faces that misunderstanding of who she actually is.
Yeah. And I can speak to that. I was actually having a conversation the other day with my mom, because my mom's very adamant about telling us we are Canadian. Like, because me and my brothers are first generation Canadian, so we are Canadian. We were born here on Canadian soil, so we're very Canadian. My parents are from Trinidad, and they're immigrants, so when people see us, they don't automatically think that we're Canadian, just because we don't fit whatever the mass majority thinks Canadian looks like. And that's been a struggle with us, like, since we were little as well. Like, I used to get lots of things. They were confused. I didn't know if I was black or brown. I was never really aware of the color of my skin until I started school. Because when you're little, everyone looks like you. They're all your family. But then it's not until you're later years where you're in school and there's, like, different kinds of people. You get to meet Asian people, you get to meet black people, you meet white people, all kinds of things. And, like, even, like, my best friend, she was black, and she was from the Caribbean as well. So that was another thing, whereas, like, I never really saw a difference in us, because I was like, oh, but she's from the Caribbean too, so we're, like, the same person, you know? And then when you're little, there's that innocence about you, and you don't learn about race and religion and culture until much, much later. And so when it comes to being the brown girl in the room, my mom would always tell us about the fact that when we get older and we have to go to work and things like that, we're going to be in the minority. And I didn't understand what that meant. And being in the minority meant that it's because you're brown and because you're a woman, you're going to have to work a lot harder for the things that you want in life. Right. And that was a lesson that I still kind of carried with me to today. I know it's changed a little bit in my mind, but it's still something that I still remember. You know, like, my mom told me that, years ago, that I'm going to have to work for this, and I'm going to be the one that's, always at the bottom. I'm never going to get, even though I might be qualified or I might be worth, the time and the trouble, I still might not get something over someone else. So this book, I was glancing through it, and I like that. I know you were saying some people think it's fiction, some people think it's nonfiction, because the story is very real. It's very authentic, and it actually speaks to a lot of the experiences that some people go through, especially in a corporate workplace. So was this something that specifically happened to you or someone that you know?
The book is fiction. It's not my story, but it's a combination, I would say, of, it was inspired by things that I experienced, by things that I've seen happen to other people, and it was just an amalgamation of, it was a story that actually called to me. I recently wrote a blog for an online bookstore called All Lit Up. It's alllitup.ca, and they wanted to know why, what was the inspiration for writing the story. And basically, the story really called to me. Like, it was, I was always working in the corporate world, and I had faced barriers. But I'd also watched other people face barriers, and I had seen things that, that were puzzling to me, and I was always trying to navigate the corporate world, and there were things that happened that just I didn't understand. And then one day the story just started calling me, and it was bugging me, and I sat down, and I literally just sat down, and the story just wrote itself, and here it was, it came out. So no, it's not my story, but it's a story that maybe encompasses so many people's experiences. And so yeah, it's totally fiction, because Sarah exists in every single brown girl.
I think every brown girl could see Sarah.
Yeah.
And that's the thing, like, and Sarah has a very relatable name. Her name is it's Sarah. What's her full name?
Her full name is Saraswati.
Okay,
the goddess of light, but her parents shortened it to make it, more modern, and they called her Sarah.
Yeah, and that's what a lot of our parents, like, my name is Alyssa, right? But that's not what, I think if I was born in Trinidad or within, like, people who were, like, around in my culture, because in Canada, because there's so many different things, they want you to have an easy name. Yes. Something that's easy to pronounce, relatable, not too, like, out there. And, like, some of the names that you hear, just like, what is that? How do you say that? How do you pronounce it? What does it mean? Kind of thing. So my parents kind of gave me a very, for lack of a better word, very white name. And that's something that actually happens to a lot of people in my generation of the same background. We just get really, really white names just so our teachers don't have a hard time pronouncing them in school, right? But this book, I know, probably inspired a lot of people after they read it, just because they were like, oh, wow, this is my experience. You know what I mean? So when was it that you started writing?
I know I was trying to figure that out when I was writing the blog. I was trying to figure out, when did I actually sit down and start writing this book? I don't know. Maybe 3-4 years ago. I can't really tell you. It was really a surreal kind of experience. I mean, I know I sat down one day and I started writing, and I can't tell you the exact year even. But I knew when I finished. So I guess it took me a few years. I really honestly can't say. It was just like this out-of-body experience that the story just kind of came out.
And was writing something that you were always interested in?
Yeah, I always wanted to be a writer. I've always wanted to be a writer since I was a little girl. Growing up in Rexdale, my mother used to force us to go to the Albion Library every week. We'd have to walk down the street to the Albion Library every Saturday, get books for the week, because she wanted us to read, to be readers. And my mom's not a reader, but she wanted us, 3 of us, to be readers. So we would come home with a stack of fiction books and we would read for the whole week, especially summer vacation. And I just started writing stories in my room, and I started writing stories in class. And I just thought it was a fun thing I liked to do. And then one day in grade 5, my grade 5 teacher, I was 10, called the class together, and he said he wanted to present a well-done certificate to a student for a skill. And he presented it to me for story writing. And I remember sitting there going, really? He said, he loved my stories, and the other students did too. And that very teacher, actually, I met with him. I found him last year, and the Etobicoke Guardian got us together, and we actually met after how many years, and we keep in touch today. And I wanted to thank him. I gave him a copy of my book, and I said, Mr. Marshall, thank you, because you were the first person that actually acknowledged the fact that I had a skill. And so from then on, I said, this is what I want to be as a writer. So it took a while for the book to come out, but you know what?
But you made it eventually, and we'll get to that. So we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we're going to hear more from Priya and the brown girl in the room.
No one wants to live outside the box. We play it safe. But if you had told me all those years ago that I'd go on to win Juno Awards and Much Music Awards, I would have laughed.
All right, stay with me. Here we go. Hands up! Reach for the sky. Come on. And hold your head up high for tonight. And every night, you're what? Yes!
To be distinct, you must be different. So I'm going to tell you this. Love Inc.'s You're a Superstar went on to explode onto the Canadian dance scene. It not only was a hit in Canada, it was a hit internationally. Top 5 in the UK, across Europe and into Australia. Our music was everywhere. Radio, TV, video, fashion, television. I was on tour across Canada, branching into the US and Europe. Our music was everywhere. Our video was everywhere.
Welcome back. You're watching Real Talk. I'm your host, Alyssa Mahadeo, and today on the show, my guest is Priya Ramsingh, and today she's here talking about her book, Brown Girl in the Room. And we're having a really great conversation, just about things that tie us together, the color of our skin, our gender, and the experiences that we've had over the years, growing up. Priya, tell me about your university experience, what it was like going to a place where you weren't really the majority and people question the color of your skin.
It was definitely different. I was not expecting, I was always very shy, but I wasn't expecting it to be like that. There was maybe a handful of people who were, of color. Mm-hmm. And people did ask me weird questions like, was I black? Was I white? Was I mulatto? I didn't know what mulatto meant. They would say things like, there weren't any racial slurs. Actually, no, there were a couple of racial slurs. But, back then, people would make racial slurs, and they didn't know that it was a racial slur. They thought that's how you referred to certain, groups of people. Mm-hmm. And so I was very shocked by it. And but back then, what do you say? Like, what do you say? What do you do? So it was very different. I wasn't expecting it to be like that. But I ended up making friends, and because I ended up making friends with a lot of people from Toronto, but even some people from outside Toronto who were curious and who didn't really care about, the color of your skin.
Yeah.
I mean, you're in university. You just want people to connect with.
You just want people to like you.
Yes.
At
Exactly.
that point, you're just like, I just want you to like me. I just want us to be friends. I want us to have something in common.
Yes, exactly.
Right? Yeah. So that's all it comes down to. Like, and it's like you said, the racial prejudice, like, people made racial slurs, but they didn't know that they were racial slurs at the time, And that happened to me, I think, the first time when I was in high school. I think is the first time it happened to me. And my high school was very multicultural, very diverse. There was never, like, only one kind of person. But the groups, I noticed, used to stay together. So, like, there was, like, a group of, like, this type of race, this type of race. And, like, a lot of them stuck together. And I think it's just because that's what they were comfortable with. Those people felt like family to them. And I remember it was one time in, like, gym class. And we were playing, and I probably got in the way of one of the girls. And I remember she was white, and I had accidentally bumped into her, and then she shoved me out of the way and called me a Paki. And I just looked at her, and I'm like, sorry, what? But I couldn't do anything. Like, I don't remember how old I was at the time, but I think I was in grade 10, and I was like, I didn't know how to react to her. I just kind of just, like, walked away, because I was like, I'm not going to deal with this. It seems like a lot. You know what I mean? And it was a confrontational thing, and I was like, this has never happened to me before. I've never been, like, called out like that, first of all. She doesn't know who I am. She doesn't even know my name. We're not friends. We're just in the same class. But she decided she was going to call me a Paki. And I'm like, don't think I'm a Paki, but, I was like, I understand why you would think so. Just like I thought you were East Indian instead of being West Indian. That's a whole other, like, differential thing as well, right? Like, people don't even realize that. And then there was another time that I experienced racism. And it was like prejudice within my own type of, like, Indian culture, where it was the East Indian West Indian argument, which I'm pretty sure you've been exposed to as well.
That's in the book, actually.
Yeah, and it was weird for me because I was like, no, but we look the same. Why is it that they wouldn't like me? And it was just because I was West Indian and not East Indian. And I think that one was the one that kind of hit me a lot harder because I didn't realize the class system played such a big part in it, and even just where you were on the totem pole, and you're, like, right at the very bottom.
Yeah.
And I was like, that's really shocking to me.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? But I remember that experience was kind of what, like, I didn't know how to take it because I realized, like, I knew that not all people are like this, not all people think this way, but in that moment when it happened, I was like, so I can't do what it is that I would like to do because I'm not your culture, essentially, even though I am, because my ancestors, my great-grandfather came from India.
Yeah.
It's like we didn't just end up in Trinidad. That kind of happened, but that's when you go way back into the history, and those are things that we're trying to teach children now, to learn about your culture, learn about your history, learn about where you came from, where are your roots, actually, and I'm sure that those are things that you've probably explored as well.
History and roots? Yeah, we have. I've had two on both of my mother's side, my father's side. They did our family history, and ours kind of goes really way back. I mean, but yes, the roots go back to India for sure. But as you were saying before, and I was thinking about something, you mentioned that people called you racial names, and you wanted to know my experiences in Ottawa. One of the things that I remember thinking was, even though in Ottawa they asked me funny questions, and the people from the north asked me funny questions, some of them had never met a brown person before. So there was no preconceived stereotypes in their minds. So once they got to know me, they just took me at face value. When I was in Rexdale, even though it was multicultural, they had preconceived stereotypes already built in. So some people already had that dislike for certain groups of people.
Yep.
And sometimes, in Ottawa, maybe ignorance was bliss because they didn't know what brown people were, and they didn't know some of the characteristics that brown people had that maybe other people didn't take to or whatever. So they just kind of accepted me. Once they figured out who I was, they accepted me at face value, and they'd use that racial term Paki, but they didn't think that was a racial term until I pointed it out. That's like using the N-word, right?
Yeah, it's
like,
a little bit offensive.
It is?
Yeah.
And they didn't know that. But in Rexdale, they knew what it was, and they would spew it with hate, and it was very different. So that word is actually in the book.
Is it in the book as well?
Yeah, and the whole relationship between the South Asians and the Caribbeans. That's a little piece in the book as well. Talks
So
about that.
was there ever while you were in Ottawa, was there ever a time where someone was like, you know, just really really ignorant about people in general, like just even like other like types of people, any like different race, things like that?
You know, I can't recall any situation like that because, as I said, they hadn't really met a lot of people of color, and the ones from Toronto, well, they were just trying to fit in. Everybody in university, you know, puts on this. Everybody just wants to fit in, wants to be friends with people. So it wasn't really as bad as it wasn't really that bad. I mean, I did feel different because I was always the brown girl in the room, always, everywhere I went, even in the classrooms, probably maybe in the lecture hall, maybe there was me and one other brown person, but, you know, it was very different going to school like that.
And then, did you ever struggle with the fact that you're like, because I'm sure it didn't matter to you who your friends were, like you said, you wanted to be accepted, but did you ever feel like you had to pick a side?
In terms of race?
Yeah, because they couldn't decide if you were black or you were white.
No, you know what? That's one thing I never had to do. Even in high school, I had friends who were from, and you know, in high school, the group of people that I hung out with, we were multicultural, but there was a group of kids who hung out with the mostly black and the kids who were mostly white. And I had friends from both. You know, I just sort of, you know, kind of tried to fit into all three as much as I could because, you know, you're a Caribbean brown girl from, you know, and nobody really knew what that meant. And so I just kind of figured I'd fit into all, you know, the groups because at some point, you know.
And that's how I feel too. Like, I feel like, no, I can fit in anywhere. It's no problem.
Right.
You know, kind of thing. Because it's like, I can speak to each individual experience, not really, but I feel like I can just, it's how I relate to people as a person, not really what the color is. Like, yeah, we might have similar upbringings. Yeah, we might have similar common, like, interests and things like that. Or, traditions and things like that. Like, that's a huge thing that kind of comes to play. And I like to learn about other people. Like, what do other people do? Because I only know my one experience.
Right.
So it's like, I've never lived anybody else's experience. So it's like, oh, well, let me vicariously live through your experience. Tell me what you guys do for things like Christmas or religious holidays. And I went to a Catholic high school too. So that was another thing. Whereas I'm this Hindu girl going to a Catholic high school, and that in itself was confusing to me, and I was like, what is happening here? I was like, do I go to mass? Like, am I cheating on my religion?
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, true.
And there's so many questions, but then also, like, my mother was raised Presbyterian in a church, so she, like, it's not like I didn't know about the Bible.
Right.
I didn't know about Jesus and God and things like that, so it's not like I didn't learn those things. I thought that they were very much a part of who I was, just because that was those are the people who raised me. Those were the things that they knew, and they can only teach me what they know.
Right.
Right.
But I think that comes from our roots in the Caribbean. I mean, and my parents, I mean, we're Hindus.
Yeah.
But my relatives, my cousins would go to convent. I mean, that was just the normal thing that you did.
Yeah.
You're taught by nuns, but it doesn't mean that you're cheating on your religion. It's just that in Trinidad, everybody kind of celebrates everything, and everybody sort of accepts everybody's religion as equal. So, you know, maybe Trinidad is a bit more progressive than we think.
And that's the thing, and that's something I really appreciate about Trinidad was the different races and cultures and religions mix very well in Trinidad, and it's just because everyone kind of collectively immigrated there. Because when you go to the Caribbean, it's a melting pot of different people. There's not just one kind of people, and that's the thing, they celebrate every religious holiday. So whether it's a Catholic holiday, where it's Christian holiday, Hindu, Muslim, doesn't matter. Like, they're celebrating it. People are getting time off. Like,
it's an excuse to have a celebration and have food.
That's what I'm saying. It's an excuse to eat and an excuse to celebrate.
That's exactly what it is.
And that's how West Indian culture, especially like in Trinidad, is. So and that's something I appreciate. Like, so those are things that's the way I was raised. And so, like, whenever people were like, oh no, well, one of the things that I hate to hear from people is like, oh no, we don't do that. And I'm like, don't do that.
Yeah, I hear
you know what I mean? And it can be applied to so many different things, but people are just like they're very like fearful of it, because they're just like, oh no, I don't. But it's because it's the fear of the unknown. Like, I don't know what it's about, so I can't be a part of that. But we'll get more into that after the break. We'll take another quick break, and we'll be right back.
event for the community. But what if CEO actually stood for catching every opportunity? This week alone, I've seen 3 businesses that shut their doors in this community.
Investing in yourself. Like, you have to know what your brand is first. So there's no other way that you're going to build a brand unless you network. You have to eventually get out there.
And it stems down to a lot of times not having the right knowledge, the right know-how.
Welcome back. You're watching Real Talk, and I'm your host, Alyssa Mahadeo. Today we are talking about diversity, because I think that's the main theme of this conversation today. But we're talking about diversity specifically in the world and in the workplace. So in corporate, which is something that's, it's been happening for generations, but it's only now that we're actually having conversations about it, where people are just like, no, this has happened to me. And Priya's book, Brown Girl in the Room, actually speaks to that experience. It speaks to the experience of many women who have, faced adversity because of who they are, because of where they've come from, just because there's the racial stereotypes and prejudices against them before they even walk into a building. And your character in your book, she faces a lot of different things. What are some of the issues and conflicts that she comes across?
Well, the premise behind the book is, she's born in Canada, but she's a brown woman, and she's young. She's in her 20s, and she's just got a new job, and she's thinking that it's a step up, and it's going to help her move into further her career. And she doesn't realize that she's been hired really under a diversity quota. That the community's changing, and the leadership says, well, you know what, you need to hire somebody who's ethnic because you don't have anybody ethnic on your staff. And so she doesn't know this. So she's trying really hard to get ahead. And then she's starting to realize that there are barriers, and then the environment's very unfriendly, and she doesn't really know what's happening. Mm-hmm. And I don't want to give away too much of the plot, but she faces a lot of barriers, not just from people who are Caucasian, but there's a woman in the story who's South Asian, and she faces a bit of conflict there, and it just outlines what she goes through, and then she eventually has to make a decision of something she needs to do. But it's really just about facing barriers and she does come across other people who face barriers and who've told them their own story. And it gives her some sort of a strength to move forward.
I like what you mentioned about the diversity quota. So that's a whole conversation in itself, because it's people who recognize that, yes, that we are the majority here and we don't have enough faces, and the way that society is now projected is that we're a people made out of many, so there's different races, different cultures, different religions, and everyone has something to contribute. So if it's only one kind, you're going to be seen as racist, and that's the biggest stigma of all. You don't want to be seen as racist. And I actually had a whole conversation. I actually did a training session with Big Brothers and Big Sisters a couple weeks ago, where we actually talked about anti-racism. And we learned about what it means to have white privilege and what it means to be a person of color, and the kind of conversations we need to be talking about with the younger generation. Because it's them who are gonna, if we continue to talk about the same things in front of them, that's just gonna be how they're raised. Their mentality is gonna stay the same, and it's never going to change. And the workplace will continue to deal with this whole diversity quota, right? So that's what they were saying. So, and I think it's not about hiring people because of the color of their skin, but it's hiring people because of their qualifications and their talent and what they can bring to the team, right? Because I can speak to this experience in journalism, in my specific career path, because when I got into journalism, I didn't get into journalism because it was something that I thought I could excel in. It was something that I enjoyed. So I was like, no, I like this. I'm going to go do this. And I enjoyed writing, so I was like, oh, if I could get a job where I could write all the time, that's what I'd want to do. So that's how I found myself in journalism. And then it wasn't until I got into journalism when I was like, oh, so it's like, it was seen kind of back in the day as a male-dominated society. So there was a weatherman, there was a weather, like the guy on the news, the weather channel. So like things like that. And I was like, okay, it's still not a big deal. But because I work in a niche market and I work specifically with the Caribbean community, there's still a lot of prejudice there, because when I walk into a room, I am the brown girl in the room, but I'm also seen as incapable. I'm seen as incapable. People don't really know how to receive me. So they don't know what to do with me when I'm there. And they don't know how to treat me. They don't talk to me the same way that they would talk to their equal, someone they consider equal. And I notice it in very little things. And people don't know that they're doing it. People do it very, like, unconsciously, whereas I've been in a room where it's been, like, I'll go to an event to take pictures. And it'll be all men that are photographers. And I'll be the one girl in, like, my dress, and I'm trying to take pictures, too. And I'm trying to compete with all these men to take this photo, and no one is looking at me. Like, no one is giving me the time of day to take this photo, because they're like, this girl's not serious, what's she here doing, you know, kind of thing. But I'm like, no, I'm here, I'm serious just as much as all of you guys. I just need a picture because I need to go put that in my newspaper at the end of the day. But that's been a lot of my experience. And then even talking to people one-on-one, people will come and ask me, because I'm a pretty face, they'll come and ask me, they want to know my business, they want to know what I'm doing there. They want to know. I'm like, can't you see, like, I have a media pass on and people will still ask me why I'm there. And I'm like, I find it really, really rude and off-putting, because I'm just like, I'm here as media. Do I not look like a media personality? And, like, I'm just like, do I need to, like, write it across my forehead that that's why I'm here? And even when I come and I'm asking them questions, or they see that I'm serious, they're like, oh, this girl's actually serious about what she has to say. And it's not until, like, much later that people realize you always have to be proving who you are and proving yourself, proving your worth at all times. So it's like, we can replace this person hands down. Like, it's no problem. Like, we can get a person who totally fits who we're looking for, someone that we want to be here, opposed to someone who we need to be here. Right?
For sure.
So tell me about your own experience in the workplace. What is it that you do professionally?
Well, I work in communications, so I do write and media relations, PR type work. I've been doing that for oh gosh, I'm gonna date myself. Over 20 years. Yeah. So I do contract work. So I do short-term contracts, long-term contracts, and I didn't start off that way. I started off wide-eyed, much like Sarah. I got a job out of university, and I thought this was going to help me move up. And I didn't realize some of the things that I was facing. And now that I look back and I see some of the things that happened, there's only one common denominator, and it probably was discrimination. But I don't know that, and I think about it a lot, and I don't know that it's overt racism as much as it's or discrimination as much as it's covert, and maybe it's subconscious, because I'm starting to realize that, our society has been one way for so long. We've had leadership that have looked the same way for so long. And people just get used to this mindset that, and it's in their subconscious, that this is what leadership is supposed to look like. And everybody else who's on the side, who are marginalized, well, they're not smart enough to be leaders. So they just automatically start thinking that, even though you're doing all the work and you're working really hard, it's almost like they just don't see, it just doesn't fit for them for you to actually move into a role where you actually have some responsibility. And when I look back now, I mean, I'm thinking about this one example of when I was working in this place, and I was young, and I was the only one in the department with a university degree, and I was doing all this work, and I was doing all this stuff, and I was trying to, keep up with all the stuff they were throwing at me. I didn't realize afterwards it was a two-person role that they had combined into one, and I was working really hard, and it was a few years into it, and the CEO had even recognized me for some of the work I did. And then they hired this woman, and they gave her a lot of my responsibilities, and they left me with the job of doing the stock, like literally packing boxes and shipping it out to the other branches. That's what they left me with. Yeah. Even though I had been there longer than her, I had been doing the work really effectively. This is what they did, because they didn't see that. They just automatically assumed that she was somebody who would be, that they would want to move up. And there are things like that I could talk about. And when I didn't know what was happening at the time because I can't prove that it's discrimination. But when I look back now, I think, how can you do that? Like, how can you actually do something like that? So I faced things like that, but it wasn't just my experiences. I've watched other people, other women of color, other people of color, just sort of get passed up for promotions, and other people coming in, like junior people who are promoted over top of them because they look a certain way. And I believe that there's a mindset that this is how it's supposed to look. And, it was only, and I can't say that it happened in every single workplace because, for the 20 people who didn't believe that I deserved to move up, there was actually one or two who actually were progressive enough to give me an opportunity.
But were they in the position to promote
some of them were.
Okay.
I have to say I got lucky. I mean, yes, I did face some situations like I told you about being the stock girl. But there were other people who were in leadership positions who actually saw beyond and had a bigger picture and who actually did give me a hand. I could talk about the editor of one of the Metroland papers who hired me to do writing. And I'm still friends with him today. There was, a couple of a CEO way back when who gave me an opportunity, and there was a few people along the way, maybe a handful, not that many, but definitely I do see that there was, and I didn't realize what it was at the time. I didn't know, but I do see a change, and I am seeing a change. And I used to be, and I agree with you. You don't want to be hired because of the color of your skin. And this whole diversity thing, I struggled with it for a while. I thought, you're calling it diversity, but you're still marginalizing us because you're putting us here in the diverse group, and that's still keeping us, there.
Yeah.
But then I started to realize as I meet some different new employers and I meet some new people and companies, the diversity brand has actually worked because what it's done is it's sunk into people's minds and it's starting to change their mindset. Before it was a mindset that leadership had to look this way and anybody who was a manager had to look this way and anybody else wasn't capable. Now people are more conscious of it and they're starting to look at you, based on the skills you bring.
It's about getting that respect. You want to garner that respect for the position that you have. So even if you are a Flora employee, I feel like you should still garner the same respect as even a manager or even the CEO of the company. And there's that show that they have where they have Undercover Boss.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, where they kind of do some of that. So we're gonna take our last break because we've run out of time. Conversation is going so well, and we'll be right back. All right.
T-minus 15 seconds. Guidance is internal. 12, 11, 10, 9. Ignition sequence start. 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Welcome back. You're watching Real Talk. Just flipping through my notes here. So we are today here on the show with Priya Ramsingh, of the author of Brown Girl in the Room, having some really great conversation, very relatable conversation, which I can appreciate because as we were discussing, these are things that are still happening today in the workplace. And I wanted to ask you, actually, was there ever a time where you walked into a job interview and the person across from you, you kind of felt racial prejudice, or like they were judging you, I don't know if man or woman, if they were judging you because of the color of your skin, and you knew that you weren't going to get the job by the time you left the interview?
I've had that happen a couple times, yeah.
Mm-hmm. What was that experience like?
You just kind of know. You know, you get a vibe, you can tell, you feel the person's energy, you can understand that no matter what you say in that interview, they're just waiting for you to finish and then usher you out. It happens. You know. Again, you can't pinpoint that it's discrimination. You can pinpoint that there's something about you that they're not happy with. The thing about me, though, they know that I'm a visible minority because of my name. So there's no surprise.
They've already known that before you even walk into the interview.
Yes.
And that's another thing. A lot of people will change their names on their resumes so that they look more white, right? More desirable. Actually, that's kind of what the term is too. It's they'll call me in for an interview if my name portrays that I'm potentially this kind of person.
Yes, that happens. I wrote an op-ed about that in the Star of 2013, and I received a lot of feedback from it because I was actually having a drink with this person who I thought was a friend of mine, and I had just read a factual article about how people change names on resumes, and we were just having a drink one evening, and I said to her, you know, I read this article, and they're saying that they don't people with ethnic names don't get hired, and people just toss their resumes in the garbage. Like, is that true? And she looks at me and she says, well, I do that. And I said, excuse me? And she starts laughing. She goes, oh, I do that all the time. And I said, that's racist. And she said, oh, I know. She said, but I don't want to hire them if they live in Brampton or they're, and I just went, did you just say that to me?
Yeah.
But it inspired me to write this. I mean, she's not a friend of mine. She wasn't a friend after that. But it inspired me to write this op-ed, and I sent it to the Toronto Star, and they published it. And then I had this flood of calls and emails from people saying, that's true.
Yeah.
And I was like blown away. I thought, you take a resume, you look at it, if there's an ethnic name, you toss it in the garbage?
And that's the thing. Like, sometimes I get a lot of resumes myself, and a lot of people that come to me are usually students. So, and because I mean I was once a student too, I know the struggle. Also, I think because of who I am and the position that I'm in, it allows me to do a lot more things. It kind of gives me that flexibility to relate to the people who I might hire personally. So I understand that they're coming from a very similar experience as myself. They're scared. They're applying to this job. They're really hoping that they can get into this position. But I also can't hire them if they're not qualified enough, or if I don't think that they can perform the job to the standard that I needed. And that's how I would go through a resume personally, right? And I've gotten some resumes too with some weird names, and I have to admit that I've judged the name too, because I'm like, I wonder what this kind of person, or I've assumed that this person is of this particular background, and when the person comes in, they're like completely different. I was like, oh, okay, all right. So it's like you can't really judge a person by their name.
No. You have to meet the person.
Yeah, you have to meet the person. You have to see who they are. You have to understand, you know, what they're looking to get out of this type of work, or why they even applied to position. Because some people, when you even sit down and you talk to people and you understand why they applied to a position, people apply it because they need it, right? They're looking for a position because they're like, no, this is something that I've been working towards. I need this position because I have this list of things that needs to be accomplished in my life. So definitely understand where you're coming from when you speak to that experience. But what have you learned through watching the way, like I said, you notice body language a lot. What have you learned, you know, even working in your environment, when watching people in the real world, like your interaction with them and human behavior and things like that?
You know, what have I learned in terms of you know, I think a lot of it is comfort level. And I believe that, you know, people tend to hire, it's a common known fact, people tend to gravitate towards people who are like themselves. And so, you know, you want to hire somebody who looks like you, who thinks like you, who's like a little mini you, because you're putting that person in your comfort zone in your work, and the workplace is competitive enough. You want people who are, you know, going to stick together. So I do see a lot of people gravitating towards people who they believe is like them. Like, I remember walking to one workplace once, and I went into the lunchroom, the cafeteria, and everybody was segregated. And I didn't grow up that way, because my friends from high school and Rexdale, we're all, you should see
all
us,
different kinds
all
of races,
different colors, right? And so, you know, I walked into this place, and there's a group of, you know, brown people sitting here, a group of black people sitting here, a group of Asians, a group of Caucasians, and I was like, what is this? Where are we living? You know?
Yeah.
And I from my observation is people tend to want to be around people who they're comfortable with, and they're uncomfortable if you're in a group of people and you're the only brown girl and you bring up something like, my mom made roti, everybody's going to be like, because they're afraid to say anything, because they don't want to say something that they're going to think is racist. And I think to myself, if you don't know what racism is, like if you're afraid of saying something because you think it's going to be perceived as racist, then, you know, we haven't really come that far, because you can't, you know, there's a discomfort that people have.
I've had those conversations like within friend groups, so I totally understand it. And like for me personally, I'm not gonna, because I want to be that open-minded friend, I'm not gonna like jump on you for being racist. I'd rather you ask the question and then get that clarity. So get that clarification. If you're gonna ask the question and you think it might be racist, or you think it might come across a certain way, first of all, say that, because you know, like, at least we know you're not being ignorant in that same conversation, but at least ask the question and then see where it kind of goes from there, because we're also, like, this is supposed to be a safe space. We're all friends, right? We're not friends because, you know, you're racist. We're friends because we like each other, and we want to learn things together. We want to understand each other better. And it's even simple things like you said, understanding the food, the cuisine that we eat, understanding the music that we like. And it's just different preferences, and different people prefer different things. And if it's not for you, it's not for you. I mean, no one's going to be mad at you at the end of the day, right? But it's about understanding what it is, and not just, you know, let me just not say anything. And the same meeting that I had gone to about anti-racism, the people in the room, very diverse. And for those of you who might know Big Brothers and Big Sisters, they've now, like in Peel, they actually have a specific group that is the Black Abuser Community Advisory Council. Okay. So they cater specifically to Black youth because they feel that they're the most underprivileged at this point. And the room, the people, like the mentors, either had a mentee who was Black, or had a mentee who had friends that were Black, or things like that. Like, there was no one specific thing. And they all came from different walks of life, different professions, but the most important thing was they were people of different races, and we were all talking about anti-racism. So before we actually started the conversation, we're like, what would make this conversation space a safe place? Right? Like, what is it that you need to have this conversation open and honest, and not feel like you're going to be judged at the end of it? And there was a girl, actually, she was a white girl, and she was sitting in the back, and the questions that she asked were very admirable to me, because she was like, she's actually in an interracial marriage, so her husband, I think, is Chinese, and she had questions because she was like, I know that a lot of my own experience speaks to my white privilege, but I don't know how it affects other people around me, and I need to understand that in order to understand the greater population, right? So it's conversations like that people need to start having, where it's just like, yeah, you might not know, but then don't just continue to stay ignorant.
Mm-hmm. No, it's true. It's very true.
Yeah. So, Priya, what's next for you? You're gonna write another book?
I do have another book that I've written, and it's with it's being considered. So it's you know, a very different storyline, but there's a similar theme of you know, multiculturalism in it. Mm-hmm. Because I grew up, you know, as a I guess second generation person, because I wasn't born here. That's really who I am. Mm-hmm. You know, I've come from the generation, and you as well, but I guess I'm a little older than you. From the generation where there were no brown people, and then when there were brown people, they weren't from the Caribbean, and then so I've lived through that whole, you know, transition period of going from where Toronto has changed, you know, the changing face of Toronto. And so it's an interesting topic for me, of how people interact with one another, and how people have been adapting to this change and in the influx of newcomers. So the second book has a similar thread.
I think it's important too, like, even when we're talking to people, like, as you said, I might be younger than you, but it still happened. You know what I mean? Like, I've still experienced some of things that you have, and I'm sure that kids in school now do still experience things. They call it things like bullying, and it comes out in different ways. And it's not always, I don't know if it's always addressed as it should be. Like, people aren't having the conversations, like I said, like, are we just going to continue to stay ignorant and be like, oh no, he was treated this way because he was a certain race, right? Or are we going to talk about why? Or even educate the children on why it is that we shouldn't do things like this, or why we should, again, treat people the way you want to be treated. And that's all it really is. But again, yeah, like, speaking to the same experience as a first generation Canadian, I think it's just about elaborating on the conversation. Like, don't find out who people really are.
Yeah, exactly.
That's really all I think it really comes down to. And a book like this, which I should actually show them the cover, a book like this, Brown Girl in the Room, really speaks to a real life experience of women in the workplace, women of color, women who are dealing with, you know, these challenges. And I love that people have written to you and told you that, you know, Priya, this is exactly what my life is like. Because that just speaks to how well you even understand the experience, right? And what it's like. And I hope that people who have either treated someone like that or who have come in contact with people and, you know, may have said some things that they were unsure of can understand, you know, where they're like, oh, you know, maybe I can see myself and other characters in this book and not only the main character. Like, you know, I've done that to somebody.
Exactly.
Right?
Right. It does help us to reflect on our own behaviors. And you know, it's important to note that the book is, even though it's about the character is a woman of color, and it focuses on discrimination in the workplace, it is also about women working together. And I mean, the entire workplace, except for her, the boss, are all women. And you know, there is another brown woman in it, and she still faces some adversity. And it's, you know, it really is an underlying theme of, you know, women not supporting each other in the workplace, and that's another theme.
That's a whole other conversation.
You know, that needs to happen.
Yeah, because the racism and then the women standing together. And that's what they say. Like Beyonce said, who runs the world? Girls, right?
Yes.
So you got to stick together, guys.
Yes.
So thank you so much for being on the show today, Priya. Make sure, you know, how can people get your book if they're looking to...
It's in Indigo chapters. You can order it on Amazon if you don't want to go into an Indigo store. I'll be doing a book signing in Brampton on, I think it's July 8th. Okay. And at the chapters in Brampton. And there's a book reading downtown at Ben McNally Books on April 11th. So if they want to come out to, if you're downtown and you want to just come, it's free. You just come out and listen to us read and ask a few questions. So that's April 11th. And then, or if you want to wait until July 8th, I'll be at Chapters Indigo Brampton.
In Brampton. All right, guys. So thank you guys so much for watching today. Make sure that you like this video, subscribe to the channel, and pay extra attention to the social that is coming out, that is happening next month. Make sure if you haven't gotten your ticket that you do, and I can offer you guys a special promo code, actually 30% off if you use promo code Alyssa. So make sure you get your tickets for May 6th, guys, okay? So I will see you again next week. Thank you again for watching Real Talk.
Like to get